Recording.
Okay, we are recording and we are live, just waiting for our room to populate.
Welcome to the Planning Board meeting of December 15th, 2021, our last meeting of this year. I'll begin with roll call. Alden Clark.
Here.
Beth DeLille is not here. Bob Kaup.
I'm here.
Heather Rogers.
Here.
Rick Tainter.
Here.
Don Walters.
Here.
Bonnie Sontag here. We also have Linda Guthrie, our note taker, and so far from the planning office, I believe we only have Andy Port, but we may have others as we get into the applications for tonight. Speaking of which, we have a public hearing for Turnpike Redevelopment LLC 166 to 168 Route 1, a smart growth plan approval, continued from November 3rd. Our other business includes an approval not required for 47 Marlborough Street and another one for 153 Story Ave, and it's at an intersection with 1 Lieutenant Leary Drive. We have approval of minutes and updates. So we'll move right into the public hearing, where we have a revised plan from our previous discussion with the applicant, and I will let the applicant decide who's going to speak first.
Hello, this is Joe Sirkovich from Arrow Street Architects. And I will be speaking first, and then I'll be joined later by Scott Cameron of the Moore and Cameron Group, as well as Bob Ulick from the Halverson Group as well. And I think Andy Port is going to flip through the slides for us.
Sure, just say next as needed.
Okay, are we all set to go?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so I think, Andy, the first 5 slides, we could probably skip through those rather quickly. This is just context that we went through in the previous meeting. We all know where the site is. If you could get to slide number 6, sheet 6. So this is our previous site plan from November 3rd. And we had listed here some of the concerns, comments, and suggestions that you folks had for us on ways to improve the design. And I'll just go through these kind of quickly just to remind ourselves what we had discussed previously. Some of your suggestions included simplifying the overall site plan. One of the key comments we felt was that the size of the building and the footprint did not fit the site properly. That was a key comment that we acted on and made a big difference in the coming slides that you'll see an improvement to the design. The vehicular circulation to and from Route 1, there were too many curb cuts. Vehicular circulation within the site and the north and south parking lots were a bit confusing. Pedestrian paved connections were a bit too narrow. Pedestrian circulation from Hill Street to the CCRT, that whole route was kind of compromised by the parking lot on the south and going past the parking ramp. The placement of the parking ramp was also in question, as well as the geometry of that ramp going down to the lower level. Visibility of the north retail area was questioned when it was connected to the building and sort of set back from Route 1. And parking and pedestrian circulation was not convenient to the live-work units that are along Route 1. The comments about the overall architecture and the materials we were using were generally good. So those were the things that we heard. And like I said, the key thing that we heard was that the building was too big. We should reduce it, and we have acted on that, and it made a big difference to some of the improvements that we were able to make because of that suggestion throughout the site. So if you want to skip to, so on this slide, we're showing a comparison of the previous site plan located below the dark outline and then the new building outline in red. Just briefly highlighting below items 1 through 6, the changes that have occurred with this reduced building footprint. The overall building length has shrunk by 50 feet. Item 2, the building footprint has been reduced by 3,500 square feet. The building height is still the same at 4 stories, mostly across the entire building now, not necessarily all of it, but more than was before. Previously, we had 3 and 4 stories. Now it's mostly 4 stories. The undeveloped land area has increased by over 8%, which has, created a lot of opportunities for public realm engagement in the site. The unit count has dropped to 92. Previously, we had 94, and on this site we were allowed 99 total. Affordable units have also dropped by 1. And the surface parking has been reduced by about 8 parking spaces. And in conjunction with that, also some of the paved surfaces have also been reduced. So I think that the takeaway from this is that reduction in the building size has been a key element in the slides that you'll see coming up, and how we have made improvements to answer all your concerns from that previous slide. Andy, the next 2 slides are just a summary of some of the things that we've done to the site. I don't want to go through and read all of these just because we'll get to them in the coming slides. So if you could skip to slide 10. Okay, and that shows the neighborhood crossing master plan. And just a reminder from the previous presentation, some of our goals in the master plan and what we want to do with this building is create a building that's really kind of a gateway, both to Newburyport as you're going down Newburyport Turnpike toward the north, as well as a gateway to the 40R district and the commercial area as you're leaving Newburyport. So we want that building to be kind of a gateway. We also want it to be an anchor for the Newburyport Crossing neighborhood and use that as a connector to 1 Boston Way and 3 Boston Way. And we're going to use that Clipper City Rail Trail to make that connection to the rest of the complex and really make it feel more like a neighborhood. In addition, we want to use that Clipper City Rail Trail as a connector to other parts of Newburyport and spaces beyond. So it's kind of a real crux, a real connector, a real nexus that has multiple uses here. And you can see that we've got 3 connections now from the Clipper City Rail Trail to our site, because we feel that it's so important to integrate it to our building and the overall master plan. Next slide. So this is the new building size in the new site plan, and I just want to give you a kind of a quick summary of what we'll be talking about in the coming slides, and we'll be touching on each one of these in detail as we go forward. But there are 5 areas that we're going to be discussing. First of all, the north parking lot and the retail area and how that's changed. Then the second area is along Route 1, the pedestrian corridor between the north and the south corner of the site. Number 3 is the southern triangle there that we call the community green near the Hill Street connector. Number 4 is the area right in front of the entry that we're calling the residential courtyard. And then the 5th area is the multiple connections along the rail trail and the landscaping along that edge. So with that brief summary, I'm going to turn it over to Scott Cameron to talk a little bit about the site plan.
Thanks, Joe. And Andy, you can stay on that plan perfectly. Good evening. So my name is Scott Cameron with the Moore & Cameron Group. Thanks for having us again tonight. From the site design perspective, my role here, in addition to supporting Joe and Bob Ulig on the building and landscape architectural elements, was to try and incorporate some technical adjustments to focus on some areas that were raised by the board and staff. So starting with the Parker Street driveway, for the most part, that has remained the same. We did make an adjustment to shift it closer to the 28 Parker Street parcel to the north. And yes, the landscape strip along that edge, especially near Park Street, got pretty darn close to zero lot line, What it did is it really embellished and widened the landscape buffer between the parking and the Clipper City Rail Trail. So we were really trying to get as close as we could, 8 to 10 feet ideally along that entire kind of westerly edge along the rail trail. As you come up, you'll see to the right, right before the cul-de-sac, we move the solid waste recycling enclosure again to that easterly lot line opposite the rail trail. So we pulled that away from the rail trail and angled it a little bit so that it would be accessible by the pickup truck. And then as you enter the turnaround, we increase the diameter of the turnaround going from 35 to 40 feet. We still included the handicap parking space nearest to the front entrances to the building, kind of right between the live work units and the main building entrance. And then we also included more of a conventional drop off shoulder on the cul-de-sac. These would be for your day-to-day, either Amazon deliveries, postal deliveries, et cetera, in that area, short-term to drop off. Then as you navigate around the cul-de-sac, turn around in a counterclockwise direction, there would be the entrance to the underground garage, which Joe creatively redesigned to be fully enclosed. So the ramp is fully covered and kind of slopes down into the ground. And we're going to add on top of that a green roof structure, which is a sustainable design element, another charge that was put on us to add more sustainability and low impact design elements. So we did make the covering over that garage ramp down into the as a green roof, and you'll see more of that on the color illustrations. Moving back, also obviously with the ramp, this is a much better configuration for the ramp with a softer slope down the garage, and we take away any stormwater element from getting on the ramp because that's covered. So all around big improvement. South end of the property, Route 1 side of the property, you'll notice that the egress way along that is completely gone. We did shift the building right up to Route 1 and kind of change the configuration a little bit, again focusing on that buffer to the rail trail. And the building is pinned on the edge of the slope easement that Mass DOT holds along that frontage. So we have it as far to the northeast as we can get it. And you'll see the distinct, there's a 6 foot wide pedestrian route along that Route 1 side that is separated from the highway with a tree belt and more landscaping between the walkway and the building, and an open space amenity area on the south end of the property. Moving to the northerly end of the building, we reconfigured the parking, emphasizing again more open space and separation to the rail trail. You'll see this 10 feet there from the parking to the rail trail. The parking space in this area will be all compact, so we're looking to maximize our compact space allowance under the zoning ordinance to minimize the pavement footprint of the building and maximize open space. You will also note on the north end of the property, the commercial ground level space is now its own building. And I did add into that 4 dedicated parking spaces that would be preserved for that space. And then the other parking spaces, which would be tenant spaces in the evening hours when they're not there, that obviously would also be open to tenant use for that commercial space. The Parker Street entrance has a direct route, and the parking spaces nearest Parker Street that would be open to the public. So there's a sidewalk connection there. There's a sidewalk connection to the rail trail at the cul-de-sac turnaround, and the direct route to the Hill Street lighted intersection crosswalk. It's 8 foot wide, directly to the rail trail. There has been some commentary to continue to fine tune that crossing over the cul-de-sac. So we will surely incorporate that into the plans, try and minimize that route. And then the third connection, again, at the retail space directly to the rail trail. So 3 connection points to the rail trail. I will note that we are preserving considerably more of the existing trees that are right on the boundary or within the property. Another big effort here with this adjustment. And from a technical aspect, we have all of the comments from Phil Christensen addressed in the technical design. We were holding on submitting that until hopefully we got some feedback from you tonight on this current design, and incorporate anything we get back tonight into that final technical submittal. But I've been in touch with Mr. Christensen. We've also received comments back from the city engineer and other town staff, which we're working into a technical response, which I hope to have ready for you as early as Friday morning. So that is still ongoing, but we're focusing more on the overall site, how it's going to look at this point. And I'll pass this on to Bob Ulig to continue on with his portion of the presentation.
Thanks, Scott. I'm first going to show you the landscape planting plan, and then I will show you an illustrative plan. My name is Bob Ulig. I lead the landscape architecture studio within Ty and Bond, and I'm a 32-year resident in Newburyport, so pleased to be involved in the visioning of this project. As Joe mentioned, simplifying the site plan has allowed us to make a variety of upgrades, which have resulted in a much more user-friendly and kind of spacious public realm around the entire site. We've reduced, as noted, the amount of impervious surfaces around the site from the roadway that we used to have along Route 1 and the parking area south of the building. And we've done a number of other touches using permeable pavers that we'll talk about as well. So have tried to modify it, both for public benefit and from a sustainability perspective. These modifications of the site plan have also resulted in a more unified plan, which, as mentioned, we've now got 3 clear routes to Clipper City Rail Trail from the site, some through the site. All our pathways are through the site. I just wanted to kind of reinforce that, we've done the grading, we've looked at it. So they're all ADA and Mass Architectural Access Board compliant. And we now also have 3 distinct publicly accessible open spaces. At the north end, we have tried to create a more generous open space around the commercial retail area, both for use by the public, for people that come to this commercial retail tenant space so that they can be outside and that space is visible and usable directly from the rail trail as one location. And then to the southeast, a courtyard and community green that is the gateway to Hill Street. And then a courtyard that is adjacent to the turnaround area in what I'll call the southwest of the site. In addition to that, we've got a richly planted buffer that runs continuously along the entire property line that is coincidental with the Clipper City Rail Trail. So a little bit of an overview. Then we've widened the Clipper City Rail Trail path connections from 6 feet to 8 feet as discussed previously. And the other walkways that are within the site, more along the internal ones along Route 1 and such, are gone from 5 feet to 6 feet. So they're a bit wider as well. As requested by the city, we have refined the landscape plan to prioritize a series of existing plantings. And we've gone to greater lengths of notating those protections. Particularly, there's a grove of oak trees that we talked with the planning office about, in which we've talked about putting construction fencing at the drip lines around those trees, and they exist as a kind of a darker, a shaded screening to the north of the parking lot, and then to the west of the parking lot, which is north of the building. So it's probably about a half a dozen trees there. The ones look much darker north of the parking lot, and then there's ones that are lighter gray toned west of the parking lot. In addition, we've protected some sumac plantings, which are kind of in the area closer to Parker Street, about halfway between kind of the connector, the southern connector and Parker Street. There's a grove of sumacs there that it was desired to protect, so we're going to protect those. And we're also protecting construction of the Alchemy against the Alchemy Garden area with fencing along those areas as well, being mindful of the value of those. The landscape that is established kind of along the property line, I want to talk a little bit about the background of that. Well, it's established over decades on both sides of the property line, and that property line runs right down the middle of the swale, that low point that runs along the length of the property line. And it's really a remnant drainage swale from the prior rail use there. It's composed of a fair amount of volunteer and invasive plant species that have established over probably the past 50 plus years. And in some areas include debris that is settled because of this being a low point. As we've discussed with the city, we are proposing to remove the debris, mitigate the invasives that occur in the areas other than these plants that we're protecting, and then generously replant this entire length in naturalized drifts and groves with groupings of mixed deciduous and evergreen trees and shrubs to reestablish an enhanced buffer from what we have right now. And our current plan proposes along this length 50 to 60 new trees just along this property line, and over 100 new shrubs along the entire length of the property line. We plan on reducing the density of the planting at the several crossings so that there's visual connections and glimpses through from the two sides of the site to ensure safety, and also to kind of make it sure that it's inviting to people so that it's clear you can pass through, you're invited to pass through, and not be kind of set apart from it. As discussed with the city, we're proposing to regrade some of the areas adjacent to the two Clipper City Rail Trail connections to make them a bit smoother, and also adjacent to the Alchemy Garden, where there's a fair amount of kind of invasives that exist on that property line adjacent to the Alchemy Garden, while accommodating and continuing to deal with and account for the site drainage there. And then we'll oversee those areas with, where appropriate, with lawn adjacent to the rail trail and with meadow mixes that are closer to the property line to reestablish a naturalized woodland edge. In addition, on focusing now, jumping over to the Route 1 side, just wanted to point out that we're planting approximately 35 ornamental trees along the Route 1 edge. And why ornamentals? Because we've got overhead utility lines there, so we're restricted in the type of trees that we plant along there. But that number of ornamentals will help kind of reduce the scale of the building, as well as give a bit of a buffer between the residents there and Route 1 itself. So a bit of a visual and physical separation. The entry from Parker Street also includes another dozen trees along its edge with the adjacent property owner. In total, the plan proposes over 100 new trees and a diverse array of other shrubs, ground covers, and perennial plantings with species that we've identified kind of on this preliminary planting list, which once established will result in a low maintenance landscape, which is attractive year round. One other last thing I wanted to point out, it's in a little bit more detail on this plan and will be shown up on the illustratives, is we've tried to get in a bit more detail about breaking down the scale of the turnaround area. And if you're familiar with kind of what we've kind of used that Spofford Street roundabout as a bit of an inspiration, the idea of in the center of it where it's identified as P2, we're looking to use a lower planting in that area, and then permeable pavers in the area called L6 around it. There will be asphalt out beyond the curb line that's there, but again, at the center is planting. Around that, the band is permeable pavers, again, to break down the scale of the drop-off area so it feels a bit more human in scale, and for the pedestrian crossing as well. Right now, I'm going to just jump over to the illustrative plan, please. Okay, thank you. The smaller residential building again results in improved civic terrace space around the commercial retail building to accommodate users. I don't know if you can you zoom that a little bit, Andy?
Yeah, just tell me where you'd like it.
Just up around the commercial retail building, because we've provided some on the kind of Route 1 side. We provided, I don't know if you can see it, but there's bar top kind of seating along that side, with the idea that this will be kind of a commercial retail establishment. We put bike racks on that side as well as benches. And then on the side that's of the building that's closest to the rail trail, we've provided, again, picnic tables and some other seating, again, for amenities for people that come to make that commercial retail space as successful and as viable as possible. And then we've modified the parking layout to reduce the impact on the existing trees to remain as discussed. And as Scott mentioned, we've used compact depth spaces. So we've been able to pull the edge of the parking lot further away from kind of the property line to allow greater opportunity for those trees to be protected and so forth, and to break up the parking with trees so that the overall sense of that parking lot is less than what was previously shown. Then as you approach the kind of where the connection approaches the rail trail, we've got Those are kind of bench and kind of lounge chair seating elements around the crescent. Again, to be an inviting entry and for use by people on the rail trail. And as you go to the south, if you pan south on the site, relocating the garage entry, if you go like kind of near, right in that area. Yep. So you'll see the garage entry just adjacent to where the automobile going into the garage is. You can see the green roof and the extents of it over the area where the garage enters and goes down into grade. And that's in addition to the green roof, it's allowed us to create a more usable and meaningful courtyard area to the upper right where you see the kind of ornamental trees. If you can pan just a little bit towards Route 1 from there, Andy. So we've got some seating areas that are accessible by both people that are coming to visit folks in the live work units, as well as to the general public in that area. And as you can see kind of by the diagram now here in the lower left, you could see kind of what we were talking about with the planting in the center, the permeable pavers around the outside of the plantings, separating that drive aisle and making circulation much clearer and when you approach the kind of pickup drop-off area and parking garage on entry from Parker Street. And as you head kind of up towards Hill Street, you could see the pathway is again separated from the property line with a 2-foot buffer. We've tried to nudge it away from the property line so that we could put a new fence in there and we could put a little bit of planting to buffer the experience so that the path isn't right up against it. In the corner here, the elimination of what was previously parking and the kind of more circuitous route has allowed more direct connection. Using this connection has resulted in a community green, which we think, given its location, there's not an entry to the building here. It's very much facing the corner. It is as much an invitation and inviting for the public that is walking through as it is for residents. The intent, as discussed with members of the planning board before, we're thinking about this plaza incorporating permeable pavers at the center, ornamental trees and fieldstone walls that are around the perimeter to buffer users from Route 1 and provides a series of comfortable seating options in the center of the site. Again, as a way of inviting people in. These revisions, as I mentioned, result in an improved experience for those also along the whole south connector, because you'll remember the adjacencies previously were kind of on the southeast corner, there was a parking lot, and on the southwest corner was the entry to the parking garage. So these adjacencies to two publicly accessible open spaces, makes this experience much better for the public and for the residents in this area. If you could pan back over to kind of the pickup drop-off area, that would be appreciated. Thank you. You'll note the waste management kind of enclosure has been moved again closer to Parker Street, away from, we tried to be mindful of this kind of pedestrian crossing from the rail trail over to Hill Street. And we've also removed, there was a series of parking spaces on the rail trail side of this connector road. We've removed those too, so that this, is much more of a pedestrian focused with visibility wide open for people crossing at this location. And then just pan a little bit closer to the rail trail. Again, enhanced kind of crescent where people approach this connector with seating options. And we've highlighted a couple of new plantings that are on the other side of the rail trail. We had discussions when we were out on site that there's a bit of a landscape buffer between the woodworking and the kind of warehouse building to the west and the rail trail, but there tends to be a gap here. And so it was suggested that we provide some supplemental plantings in this area to kind of fill in that gap. So we've agreed to do that as well. And if you pan a little bit closer to Parker Street, we've moved the connector walk from the spaces that can be used for people coming to visit the rail trail just inside the Parker Street entrance. We've moved that away from the edge of Parker Street directly to the parking spaces, as we think that's a safer connection than making people walk right along the edge of Parker Street. Next image, please. So we included a series of precedent images just to show you kind of our thoughts on materiality, kind of working from the upper left-hand corner. The idea of, where possible, using fieldstone walls, particularly along the Route 1 side and around the community green. Then the image to the right is showing you kind of a bit of a look and feel as to kind of what the permeable pavers around the roundabout at the drop off would look like, and plantings inside of it, probably not a fieldstone wall at the center in case we have to have emergency vehicles jump that curb, but just to be a general idea. If you pan to the right a little bit, again, an image kind of, the kind of permeable unit pavers with gaps between them to allow stormwater to infiltrate. Again, to the right, thinking maybe about a blended type of unit paver. So there's a mix of coloration in both the pedestrian and the vehicular areas to make it vibrant, and also in vehicular areas to avoid staining from vehicle use being really highly prevalent. If you move to the right, again, the idea of going to put a louvered screening around the trash enclosure to hide it from view. And then if you could go you could probably pull out at this point a little bit. Yeah, so wanted to show bike racks, which we're including on site, consistent with what we showed in the same kind of ensemble of site furnishings that we had at 1 Boston Way. And then site furnishings in terms of kind of benches and picnic tables. And then to the right at number 8, kind of this idea of some high top bar tops, maybe outside the commercial retail, as kind of a more appropriate to that kind of use. And then we're introducing benches as well as some of these sun lounger chairs on the right-hand side at the connection with the rail trail. Then in terms of lighting that we're using, the lighting should be familiar to you. If you go out to 1 Boston Way, it's the similar kind of ensemble of fixtures, parking lot cutoff lights, just like this, LED with warm LEDs for the kind of parking lot areas. And then lower left, I believe, is kind of the pedestrian scale fixture that we used again at 1 Boston Way. And in some instances, depending upon whether we've got areas where we need to fill in light levels, we're going to introduce a bollard type fixture. And then we just have kind of standard planting details within that. Next, please. And just a quick overview of kind of this strategy for lighting in the north parking lot. Generally, north of the commercial retail building is going to be parking lot lighting. There's one light adjacent to the rail trail and the commercial building, which is the kind of more pedestrian pole mounted light. Then all along Route 1, you'll see the ones that are circled, and then wrapping the Hill Street kind of connector. All those are pedestrian pole lights. And then we have back to kind of more parking lot lights from the Parker Street entry to the turnaround area. And then pole lights around in the pedestrian environment. And all these complement kind of lights that are at the building entry and the garage entries as well. Next, please. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joe to review the building features and modifications.
Thanks, Bob. So this is the updated diagram of the building organization of the entire building, updated to the shorter building and the added floor on the south side. We're still keeping the same concept of 2 buildings. In this case, now there are 2 buildings at roughly just over 12,000 square foot footprints each, with a connector where in the center that we call the hinge, that has primarily most of the amenity features on all floors, including the lobby at the ground floor. We have moved one of those amenity pieces that used to be in the center off to the southern portion. You can see that little blue amenity area at the very northern end of the building, far off to the left, and its associated roof deck. So at the northern end, we still have some semblance of a 3-story building. As you approach it from Newburyport, you'll see kind of a lower scale building as you come by. The commercial retail building has been, as stated before, pulled off on its own, so it has its own unique identity and more of a chance to survive as a retail component. Next slide. This is just a view from the other angle of the same diagram, showing that link in the center and the 2 building concept, showing here how it bends away from Route 1 to sort of reinforce that curve as you come down Newburyport Turnpike, and how it opens up towards the Clipper City Rail Trail area. And I think pulling the retail space away and out of the building was also kind of a key thing in this redesign. Shortening that building allowed us that additional space to be able to do that. And I think some of the images of the renderings will show how this has much more of a chance to succeed as a retail component. Next slide. An overview of the floor plans from basement all the way through the 4th floor. And you can see on the 1st floor that retail component is off on its own. On the 4th floor, you can see that so this is the typical floor, like the 3rd floor. We still have that amenity component in the center where the hinge is facing the rail trail. We have filled in the uppermost portion of that wedge with some of the units to make up for some of the units that we had lost by compressing the building on both ends. And then on the 4th floor, if you pan up one, please. You can see that the amenity space on the 4th floor has shifted to the far northern or the left side of the building, and there's still an outdoor 4th floor amenity deck associated with that, so that it faces down towards the rail trail. We think that lounge area will have kind of a nice glow, like a beacon, actually, when you're coming in from Newburyport, and you can see that glow of that glassy element up on the 4th floor. Next slide. These are just slides of each one of the floor plans, starting with the basement, showing the new configuration of the ramp as you come down. It's much easier to get down and make that turn right or left as you come into the parking area, as opposed to the way it was previously. The 1st floor plan showing the ramp and the green roof on top of that. The gym is open to the little outdoor terrace there between the ramp and the gym. Well, there used to be a pool there previously, so we took that away and still decided to keep it as an outdoor terrace. The retail component on the far left, you can see, is pulled away from the building, and there's a small rain garden in between the retail area and our building itself. The retail building, as Bob and Scott pointed out, is surrounded by an outdoor terrace with plenty of seating and connections to the rail trail, as well as connections to the new sidewalk on the Newburyport Turnpike side. Each one of the units has its own small terrace on the ground floor. And we also have at this level 2 live work units that are now open to the courtyard side near the building entry, as opposed to on the Turnpike side. That was another good comment that we picked up on from the planning committee. It's more accessible on this side, easier to get to. There's parking available for those live work units. So next slide. Just moving up the building to the 2nd floor, showing the 2nd floor terrace above the main lobby and the lounge and amenity areas that face that area. We have, as noted previously, 23 affordable units that are dispersed evenly across all 4 floors. Next slide. The 3rd floor, which we've seen, and then the 4th floor. Next slide. And then the roof plan. And we still are planning on including solar panels on the south portion of the roof, depending on where the MEP systems land. We're proposing to save some space for solar panels up on the roof there. Next slide. Some inspirational images that you've seen before about how we plan to treat the building mass with setbacks, bay windows, different materials. Next slide. The materials that you've seen before, combination of brick, wood, look, and reinforced cement panels. Next slide. Some of those pictures of the actual samples, which I believe you still have in your office. So hopefully you had a chance to refamiliarize yourself with those. Next slide. Axonometric view facing the rail trail, showing the new elevations and the treatments. We're using the same kind of language as we did previously, except now we have that additional 4th floor on the north side. Each building, the southern building is treated slightly differently than the north, but similar materials, just maybe different colors and different textures. Next slide. And looking from the Route 1 side, also the new retail space down on the bottom right-hand corner, we kind of saw that as like a garden shed or a little greenhouse of some sort that could be kind of a nice little jewel when viewed up against the building itself. Also showing the Juliet balconies that face the Route 1 side. On the other side, we have full balconies. Next slide. Overall elevations, the west elevation on the upper side, showing primarily brick on the left, and then on the right-hand side, primarily brick on the base, and then wood and wood look type elements interspersed throughout to help break up the elevations on both sides, with parapets that kind of step up and down to help also reduce the overall length of the building. And in the center, we're still treating that amenity area as more of a glassy hinge type connector on both the west and the east elevations. Next slide. The end elevations on the north, the upper one showing the building itself, and then the lower one showing the little retail shed component. And then the south elevation showing primarily the wood elements there. Next slide. Section through the northern building now showing it as a 4-story building with parking below, and then a section through the ramp. In between the ramp and the building is that small outdoor terrace right off the lobby and the gymnasium with the 2nd floor outdoor deck. The sloped area of the ramp covering is proposed to be a green roof, as mentioned previously. Next slide. And then the renderings. This one showing the connection to the rail trail. Also showing some of the ins and outs that we're doing along the elevation to help break up the overall mass of the building. In the foreground, you can see there's that little jog that happens in between the warm wood areas. And then on the northern side, the upper floor sort of steps back a little bit and the brick pops up in other areas just to help break up the overall mass of the building. You can see the entrance to the parking ramp on the left, the connection to the rail trail, as well as the connection to Hill Street all the way across. Moving that parking ramp was a key design aspect of clearing up this whole courtyard area and making it much more open feeling, more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. And so that was another good suggestion that we capitalized on in this redesign. Next slide. Looking at the view of the building from the rail trail as you come into the lobby there in the foreground, and the upper level amenity deck at the 2nd floor with bench seating, as Bob had pointed out, and some of the new plantings to help preserve that feeling of privacy both between the building and the rail trail. Next slide. This is the community space with the fieldstone walls and that circular area with bench seating as well. The connection to Hill Street is right behind us, and then you can see the pedestrian path in front of us, 6 feet wide, and then the 8-foot wide one on the left-hand side. Some screening for the building, and then as you move down Route 1, there's screening all along that. A little bit of buffer and ornamental trees all the way down to the north parking lot, and an extension of the fieldstone walls in some areas all the way down as well. Next slide. The view coming from Newburyport, you can see that little beacon of an amenity space up at the top. And then the bay windows that kind of march along the north building all the way down. The variety of materials and textures that we're trying to get to keep this building looking lively and varied. Some of the Juliet balconies that you can see along this edge. And then just sort of the activity that we anticipate with people moving up and down this area, primarily to get to that retail place that we think will become kind of a destination location for some of the bikers and people using this the rail trail, both to commute and for recreation. And then that little roof deck up on top that has kind of an overlook down to the rail trail and the retail area to try to create kind of a nexus between all the things that are going on there. An opportunity for a food truck as well in that area. Next slide. And then finally, this slide is the view from the rail trail looking towards the retail area, the amenity space up above, and again, the fourth floor roof deck and all that activity that we anticipate happening in this area. And I think that's the last slide. But I do want to reiterate that, you know, squeezing that building down was a key suggestion that we really appreciate, and it was kind of a domino effect that led to all these other movements all over the site. So I think it was a key suggestion and a good one. So thank you for that.
I'd like to say thank you for your responsiveness to all of our feedback. I'm glad we could be helpful to you so that you could be helpful to us. So this is a very good start, or actually moving quite far along from where we were before. Before we get into any discussion with the planning board, I'd like to call for public comment, as this is a public hearing, and then we'll have all the information we need to move forward with detailed discussion. So Andy, could you open it for public comment, please?
Thanks, Chair. So if you have any interest in commenting, just raise your hand using Zoom's feature, the hand button. We do have, it looks like, one caller. I believe you can press *9 to raise your hand if you're interested. Not seeing any takers, Chair.
Okay, we'll close the public comment portion of the hearing and move back into discussion. As we did the last time, I think it might be more easy for all of us if we try to go through the staff report as an agenda and comment as we go. Obviously, we'll start jumping around as people have comments that lead us to other sections, but this might be a good way to get started. There was a request for dimensional waivers, and we had discussed one of them already and felt it was okay, the maximum front yard setback waiver to increase this from 10 to 15 feet. There's also a request for a waiver for the, there is a reduction in the overall footprint, but it's still quite significant. And I'm wondering if anyone has any concerns about that waiver. So we can, yeah, Bob?
Well, I think we should talk about the footprint. I would also like to talk about the setback along Route 1. And it's not so much about dimension as it is the character of that frontage of the building. And Chair, if you want to go through the staff reports first, and I'll reserve comments.
Yeah, I think it might keep
on.
us on track.
I'll just hold off, but I think there are a few things to talk about there.
Okay. And so we may return to these waivers later because we're not going to vote on them now anyway. We're just going to give a sense to the applicant that they're headed in the right direction on them. So if there are no major concerns about the actual footprint, but more about the design, we'll move on to those as we get to them in the staff report. There is the third waiver. I just want to raise it for consideration and we can move on. Having to do with a waiver requested to allow no facade at the front line on Route 1 and a new pedestrian sidewalk constructed there for just pedestrian use. And that fits into what Bob wants to talk about, I'm sure, on how that will work. So
Yep.
let's move on to,
Excuse me, Bonnie,
yes.
I just want to go back a section. This isn't this waivers, but it relates to the submission waivers. There's a comment in the staff report that Minko comments that the signage plan and details will be submitted when the site plan is approved. And I was looking at the minutes of the meeting, and the motion was that all of these things would be provided before approval. So I just want to make it clear that that comment is not consistent with our vote.
So it's before approval.
Yes.
That'll be fine.
This is Andy. Could I comment on that as well?
Oh, sure.
So I believe Caitlin had been, I think, conveying some of what the applicant had understood from the meeting and requested there, perhaps with some of their language. But just as Rick mentioned, I understand that to mean, at least as I've spoken to Minko's team about this, it seems to me what they're referring to is the sort of straw poll agreement on or vote on the layout of the site plan. At which point they would provide remaining details for things like that. So I guess maybe Minko could perhaps clarify, but I think what they mean is exactly what Rick's talking about, and that is consistent with what the board discussed last time, which is submitting that perhaps after consensus on the layout of the site, but certainly prior to the approval and part of it.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense, and I don't think there's any problem with that. So that's just the wording here that has to be adapted to what we voted on last time, which is before the final approval. Okay. It is hard to follow the staff report. You know what? I'm going to change my mind. We're going to talk about whatever we want to talk about, and we'll go back and use the staff report as a check to make sure that we've covered everything. How's that? And that it's more organic and we can build on each other's ideas. So Bob, why don't you get started?
Okay. I can start with just the overall site plan, and I would echo some of the comments that I think there's a lot of progress here. Enough progress that you can really start to see the potential of this site as an anchor at the north end of this smart growth district. I would say though, and I feel pretty strongly about this, that this building needs to have two distinctly different frontages. One is the zone that faces generally south, that faces the rest of the smart growth district, that faces the train station. That's where there is a potential for synergies, and with a site like this, my point of view is it's always best to bring all of the activity generators, all of the elements together in a way that really creates a kind of viable urban space that has a mix of uses. So there's synergies here that include pedestrians, that include live-work units, that could potentially include retail. It's the arrival point for the building. So I would encourage you when fine-tuning this to try to make that plaza area on the south side of the building as large as you can make it, because that's where all of the potential is to make this more than just a multifamily residential development. It's where you have the potential to really feel, live, work, and potentially retail and other activities, and where the rail trail activity kind of crosses the site. So I would really put all of your eggs in that basket and really emphasize the south side of the building. Just the opposite for me is the Route 1 frontage, which I do not see as a pedestrian environment at all, because there's no place for people to go up there. If you get beyond this site to the north, there's no place to go. And if you get beyond the site to the south, there's really no place to go other than to connect to the rail trail connectors. So I would encourage you to look at that zone as more of a buffer, because those units at grade right along Route 1 need a buffer between them and the traffic. I like the idea of the fieldstone walls that were being talked about. And I wonder if that can be kind of taken advantage of along that frontage to create more of a buffer. And unless there's some compelling reason on the regulatory side that a sidewalk needs to be there, I don't think it's doing much for you. I think you could emphasize again the connection from the rail trail that exists to the south of the building, because that crosses that plaza again, where you could create a lot of activity. And lastly, and then we can kind of move on to other points to discuss. The retail, I honestly don't understand what that can possibly be. It's the rail trail does not generate enough foot traffic to create a market for a viable retail space that's 12 months out of the year. It's not big enough that it's a destination for people to drive to. And quite honestly, it's at the wrong end of the site to take advantage of all of those other things that I was talking about. So I applaud the idea of retail as a use on the site. And I think if you could make it work, and I also think the comment about food trucks is a terrific idea, but I think it's at the wrong end of the site. I think it again needs to be back to the southern end of the site, where all of the activity is mixing. And I would acknowledge that all of that's really only possible if you've made that a little bit bigger. And I think you got to push the building around a little bit more in order to do that. But I think you've moved the plan a long way from the last time we looked at this, and you can really start to see these pieces coming together. But I don't think you're quite there yet.
Great, thank you. Let's stick with those ideas to see if there's anything else that someone would like to build off of that before we move on to other details.
Yeah, Bonnie, I'll try first. I guess I had a couple of questions, and they were really similar. One was a bit more detailed with respect to hours of that retail space and how that was going to be doubling up with parking space. I really didn't understand that in the hours of operation, which really dovetails into some of Bob's points about what is the point, and I couldn't agree with when I first heard the food truck, I even thought to myself, well, want to have space for several food trucks, and obviously they're seasonal during when it's warm versus, the middle of winter. And going to the point about the rail trail, I would even ask again, you can only do so many things with this space, and I personally would not care. Again, even if it wasn't moved to stay there, you forego that retail space for whatever reason. Then to me, I wouldn't care whether there was just one connection to the rail trail. Now, all of you may not, because I don't see the point of having two connections, especially I think that connection was made, quote unquote, to get access to the rail trail, access to the retail space. And I'm not sure if it's not there, I'm not sure I really understand it.
Okay, great, thanks. Would anyone else like to join this part of the conversation?
I will.
Okay, Rick.
So kind of building off what Bob was saying about the buffer on the Route 1 side. I can see that the development needs that sidewalk only to get people really from the parking lot to that entrance of the building, because there's no, because of the squeezing and the entry to the underground parking on the rail trail side, there's no direct connection. So I don't think they can lose that sidewalk, although I agree that it doesn't really go anywhere to the north from there. I was looking at the site plan, I guess it's C31, which shows the area between the sidewalk and the road being labeled a 6-foot tree belt, but none of the landscaping plans show any trees there. And I guess I feel, I was just wondering whether it's possible to shift that sidewalk closer to the building and kind of flip the trees onto the roadside, because the trees that are shown on the landscape plan, they're just labeled parking lot trees. They're not really identified otherwise, but they only have about 12 feet of space, I think, to grow between the building and the edge of the pavement, the sidewalk pavement. So I was wondering whether it would be possible to get bigger trees and hence more of a buffer to the building, and also more of a parkway feel along Route 1, if the tree belt could be made wider and could actually be a tree belt instead of, it's actually shown on the landscape plan as sod and seeded lawn. So it really isn't providing any buffer at all at that point. That was just that whole area there. It's difficult. And you know, Bob was talking about, could the building be moved? I think Bob was talking about, could the building be moved closer to the street? But I think it can't because of that MassDOT slope easement. I think the building is right up against that slope easement. So I think the building is as close to the turnpike as it can be. But if it were possible to move the sidewalk closer to the building and put the trees on the street side of the sidewalk, you might get bigger trees, more of a buffer, kind of soften the whole experience for the people who are living in the building, as well as for the drivers going down there. So that's just one whole bunch of issues relating to the buffering and the landscaping on that side of the building. I think on the other side of the building, in the alchemical garden area, I don't think that they caught the fact that there is alchemical garden on both sides of the pathway, the current pathway into Haley's, and they're showing elimination of some of the alchemical garden landscaping features and replacing it with, again, sod and seeded lawn. So that's another area where there's kind of a disconnect between existing conditions and the plan. And also when you look at the renderings, I think it's A501 showed basically the alchemical garden is completely gone. So I think, and I know that's probably done by somebody different than Ty and Bond, but it just kind of doesn't match what's shown here on the landscaping plan. I want to make sure that we're clear about what is happening with the landscaping there. And I guess the other thing is the A506 also suggests that the pathway that cuts across the traffic circle has a different paving. It looks like that in the concept. Here it looks like it's paint. So and I think we're going to talk more about that sidewalk, that crosswalk, and how that's laid out later on. But I just want to note that disconnect there. And I guess finally, I just hope that when we have I know this whole plan set is just labeled concept plan, so it's not meant to be a detailed site plan. But when we get to that point, we hope that the preliminary planting list and the landscaping plan would actually be more specific than just saying parking lot tree, and would actually list the numbers of the trees by the number of trees in this preliminary planting list table.
Okay, Heather? Thanks, Rick.
So I have a few overlapping thoughts. The sidewalk on Newburyport Turnpike in this rendition and in the previous meeting made me uncomfortable. I am very familiar with this I walk through that opening from the rail trail through the parking lot, and I use that crosswalk on Route 1. And if I look to my left, I would not want to be walking on that curve. It just doesn't seem like something that would be inviting. So my question is, when you go into the garage, is there an internal access way in that middle lobby that could sort of alleviate that front sidewalk? In other words, could they go through the building and out through the front, have something tighter to the front for them to access those front doors? That would be one of my questions. And another question I have is on parking, which I had in the previous meeting too. And I've read all of the spots in the per studio and the per one bedroom. But my question is, over by the residential, are those part of the parking spaces that are also meant to be used by the residential? So are they an overlapping use, and how is that to be really known that that would work well? In other words, if everybody, people are working from home now more, so there's less coming and going, let's say, and depending on what that retail space is, would they be occupying throughout the day spaces that really were allocated for residential, or is it a different completely designation?
This is, I apologize for interjecting. This is Andy through the chair. I noticed that Scott Cameron, civil engineer for the applicant, is raising hand, and I was wondering, just myself, just given the number of comments, if it makes sense to have the applicant respond to some of them as we go, or. But
That's exactly what I was about to do, Andy. Thank you. Yeah, Scott, why don't you pick up with these comments? We'll get back to other planning board members on this and other issues, but I think we do have an awful lot of information out here and some questions that I'd like you to respond to. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andy. Regarding the use of the parking spaces, the 5 nearest Parker Street are intended to be accommodating to public parking for access to the rail trail, as are the 4 in the north end of the building facing the building for the retail space. Now, as far as how that is, I guess, enforced, this would be obviously the resident parking would get the priority. We picked those spaces at Parker Street. They're the furthest away from the building. They will likely be the last filled by residents, and they will also likely be assigned with numbers, especially the northerly parking area. As far as how we manage that, signage, it's signage, and there's a various different options. We want to avoid public people parking there overnight. So likely there might be a time limit, resident parking 6 p to 6 a or something like that. But that's all something we can work out with signage. Regarding the sidewalk, we do have door entry points along that route. We need them for building code. I'll let Joe speak a little bit to that if he feels the need, but the sidewalk along Route 1, we're dealing with a lot of, again, these are a lot of the challenges we faced on the other properties. One of the encumbrances with a lot of this real estate is the overhead wire component. And I hate to say we're driving design with that, but we are driving design with it. We tried so hard to move wires on the other projects, and it just doesn't happen. And we have on Route 1 here the same situation with this, some overhead wires running along the frontage of the property along the building. So we don't really have the ability to put any large trees there, which is why that's shown as grass between the sidewalk and Route 1. We're also, keep in mind, working with Mass DOT on the frontage improvements. While I think we could possibly look at eliminating that sidewalk, we did receive a comment back from Mass DOT that actually wanted extended across the entire frontage. This may be part of their long-term planning, and they actually wanted it closer to the highway. So we're trying to manage that. We still have some work to do with the discussions with Mass DOT, but right now we feel the walkway is we need to plan for that and address the landscaping accordingly along that frontage. I think that's all I had. I don't know if Bob or Joe wanted to chip in.
Just to comment, yes, we do have 2 stairs that empty out onto that sidewalk along Route 1, as well as that lobby. in the center. So that's part of the reason why those sidewalks are there. And, you know, if you want to walk out the lobby and take a walk down to the retail district to the south, that's one place where you could do it. You could walk along that sidewalk down there. I've walked that area myself, and I didn't feel like the cars were traveling that fast. And I think that, to me, with the improvements that we have planned with the curbs and, you know, those stone walls, it will become much safer for people to walk along that area.
I was just going to add, so relative to just reiterating what Scott had mentioned, the ornamental trees was more both not putting large trees there, both because of the kind of horizontal dimensions we were dealing with, as well as the overhead line dimensions. If we tried to put in canopy trees, I'm sure they would get rejected from Mass DOT relative and utility companies for the overhead wires. We also had kind of, in terms of having the cross section, the idea was, you know, given that there's the vehicular traffic along Route 1, we wanted to set back the walkway so that there was a buffer between it and the road. We didn't want the walk right along the curb line. So from a planting perspective, the kind of thinking was we were going to plant between the sidewalk and the curb line with something that was like kind of a more of an ornamental grasses, something that was more herbaceous, meaning not like a woody plantings, because that area is going to get a lot of use and abuse from snow and salt and so forth. Whereas we were putting the more lush plantings between the sidewalk then and the building to create the buffer there. So if that makes any sense, you know, if you can think about it sectionally, like something that's a little bit more rugged, rough and ready along the road edge, and then inboard from the sidewalk would have more lush plantings.
I think just to comment on that, if I can, for a second, I hear the comments about the limitations and understand the egress requirements, but I still do not think that is a sidewalk that is going to be a pleasant pedestrian environment that people will just want to go out and you know, walk down the street on. This is not an urban environment. The Route 1 environment is about traffic, and it's moving relatively quickly through there. So it's just not a pleasant environment. And if there was a way that you could address the egress requirements, possibly by, you know, exiting the building and moving north out of the north stair, exiting the building, moving south out of the south stair. I don't know if the middle connection is part of your egress scenario or not, but if there was a way of minimizing that, and again, getting back to dealing with this as a landscape buffer so that those units on the ground floor do not feel like they're right out on Route 1, I think that's worth talking about. And I hear what Rick is saying, and maybe I'm not completely understanding the MassDOT requirements along here, but is the building right at the limit of where it can be?
This is Scott Cameron through the chair.
Yes.
So the easement is only one factor, and yes, we do have the building pinned right up against it. It is a variable width easement. The other challenge is simply the constructability. The southerly end of the building closest to Route 1, only 10 feet from the highway. We already have some challenges there with slope backs, and will probably require some sheet piling in order to construct the foundation below the highway grade. So even given an opportunity maybe to move it closer, it really isn't practical.
I'm thinking more about the middle. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm thinking more about at the middle of the building, not at the ends necessarily.
Yeah, can you see the easement? That is why that shape is there. So we're fitting this around that easement. I don't know, Andy, if you can highlight it.
Can't really see that.
It looks like a
Dash
I mean,
line.
It's a V.
it looks like a V. It juts out almost like a nose facing at the building. Juts out 20 feet.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I see Karen's got her hand up. Did you want to contribute on your side?
Yes, this is
Oh,
Lou
Lou.
Minicucci with Karen. We're at one computer, and that's why her name
Okay.
popped up. First of all, I'd like to thank the the board for all their time involved with reviewing our project. I wanted to just make a very brief comment on the retail. I'm personally felt, and I might have read this incorrectly, I know that it was important to have a retail component. And so this is one of our options. And having talked to some of the staff members, it seemed like this would be a retail component that would service the rail trail. But I've always been concerned that there would really ever be a viable retail location possible on this site. So I would have no qualms about getting rid of this particular retail location and this building, and maybe taking Mr. Coop's advice and trying to see if we can consolidate it more to the middle of or near the lobby area. But I see that if we do that, that retail component would be more of a service to the residents of Newburyport Crossing. I don't see it relying a lot on the general public. Now, maybe there may be some people off of the rail trail that could come there, and I think we'd have to think through how we could make that that possible. But I would, if the general consensus is that that retail is an inappropriate location, I think we'd be fine with relocating it. In terms of the sidewalk, I'm happy to eliminate the sidewalk. Frankly, I think this is a DOT kind of a requirement that put on us, and maybe we're trying to force it in there. I kind of agree. I've walked this area a lot. You never really truly feel safe along that sidewalk, but I would be for eliminating that as well if we can do it and satisfy the DOT at the same time.
Okay, let me just comment on the retail. That's part of the mixed use that's required for Smart Growth District. And while it may not be in the right location, it contributes to the requirement of the district. And 2 live workspaces don't do it on their own. So we had talked about, I think initially you did have it at the center of the building, but very close to a connection to the rail trail, and that it could be different uses at different times of the year. So it would be ice cream in the summer and bicycle rentals and or repairs. And then in the winter, it could be more of a cafe, focusing more on warm foods and a place to hang out. So I think we need to keep some kind of retail commercial in this project. It's just a question of where it fits and where it would work. And that would be my vote on it. And I think we should seriously consider integrating it.
Well, if having a retail component is a very important aspect of the project, and to allow the general public to be able to access it, because that would help support whatever ventures go into this building, its current location gives it the best shot, because not only do you have the people at the Newburyport Crossing development, the 3 buildings, but you have people from the rail trail, and you have people that are passing by in their automobiles. And I had thought very quickly, I've spoken to a coffee shop person on Pleasant Street who currently delivers coffee and pastry to One Boston Way, and spoke to her about maybe opening this location in the morning, say from 7 in the morning till 11, and she would have basically coffee, muffins, pastry that she would bake off-site and bring it here and have somebody operate this in the morning. And I can see somebody, because this is like an AM side of the road, so you have AM side of the roads and PM sides of the road. AM sides of the road are really good for coffee. So I can see somebody as they're leaving the downtown Newburyport to make their way south on Route 1, pulling in here, grabbing a cup of coffee and a muffin and taking off. And then at 11 o'clock, I saw the possibility of having an ice cream operation there. So there would be some minimal space that the ice cream would be stored, but then it could be operated as an ice cream shop that may also sell salads and sandwiches for lunchtime, and then could extend their hours for the rail trail people who drive by in their bikes for water, and possibly we'd put like an air compressor there so people that could fill their air tires and have some repair equipment available to bikers. And then I thought in the wintertime, people could have, maybe the Rotary Club sells Christmas trees here. You have the coffee and pastry in the morning, and then you have artisan fairs for Christmas where you sell different kinds of commercial goods during the Christmas season. Haley's used to do that. Mrs. Strong had Mrs. Roy had an alpaca farm, and she used to sell scarves and hats and things like that. So I see that this location with multiple uses that can attract people from the rail trail, people driving on Route 1, and the people from our building would make this a potential successful location. So that is why, if we're going to try to truly do a retail, I'm not convinced that anything will truly work, but that was my thought process of having multiple businesses and users occupying the space at different times of the day to give them a shot. And I envisioned that I would charge very little rent for this location to make viability work. So if this were a normal business, if I pro forma this for less than 50% of what I would really need to get, or what a market rate would be, in order to support the possibility of it being a viable location.
Thanks very much. It gives us a good picture of that, what you envisioned for that. Was there anyone else on the applicant side who wanted to speak to the issues that are on the table before I go back to the planning board? Okay, I've got lots of hands up. I think I saw Rick first. Go for it.
Thanks. I'm just going back, continuing this discussion of the retail space. I think we originally said we wanted the retail space to be right by the circle, adjacent to the lobby, because that made most sense in terms of the community, basically. That's about where you'd park your bike right now to go to Haley's. And Haley's draws a lot of walk-in traffic, especially during the warmer months, but even in the spring and fall. So I think that is, it would make a lot of sense to replicate that. And also, to Bob's point about the fact that this would be more of a focal point for the 3 buildings in Newburyport Crossing, that it would be more convenient, be more central. It would help to create a sense of community, I think. I have been willing to accept the idea of the retail space on the north end, even though I don't think it is as good a location. We have to have a retail space. I'm not really sure that the idea of shuffling businesses through over the course of a day is going to make for a very robust center that somebody can predictably find what they want. I'm definitely not sure that you want to have people coming in for coffee in the morning. I've seen many Dunkin' Donuts off roads that are much less traffic than Newburyport Turnpike, and they create awful backups from entering and exiting at rush hour. So I don't think you really want to target it to that road user. I think you want to target it to the residents of your projects, of your developments, and to the people who are going to the train station, who are going by for recreation and so forth. I think that you really have to think of a more robust commercial use than just kind of a pop-up thing where different businesses come through at different times of the day. We really want to have the zoning called for mixed use, and kind of gave you a pass on the first 2 buildings by saying that live work qualified as mixed use, but it really isn't the same thing. And it really needs to be a really good effort to make a space for a successful business. And as I say, I think Haley's has done it in the past. They'll be losing the drive-in business, but they'll be getting hundreds of dwelling units that will be able to take advantage of it. So I think it's a stronger position for a business than Haley's has right now.
Okay, move on to Don.
Yes, just a couple of thoughts on this. First, with respect to Route 1, if we looked into the future, I do believe there's a plan or a goal to have the traffic circle one lane. I think somewhere around this general area it goes from 2 lanes to 1 lane. So I suspect, even though I'm not a fan of Route 1, that there'll be some incremental calming in this area. Not that I would discount any of the comments made by all of us regarding Route 1, and it's not necessarily a place one would want to hang out. Secondly, going back to the retail, and again, we said we did the work study for Boston Way. What I'm trying to understand, do we have the right, Bonnie? I'm not saying we want to I want to understand, do we have the right to provide a waiver to not have retail here? Or is that we cannot do that? Again, I'm not saying we want to exercise it. I want to understand, do we have that option? Because to me, if in spite of what we all think, if the applicant who's done market studies, et cetera, as compared to what we think, says this is not viable, and in turn, that space is not there, and consequently, that space is transformed into something else, whether it's more green space or something else that the board thinks is beneficial, then that's a trade-off we have to make. So again, I'm just trying to understand, Bonnie, do we even have that optionality?
My understanding is that it is an integral part of a smart growth district. We're trying to we want them to create a community where people can live and work. That doesn't mean that outsiders can't pass through, but we are not producing an apartment buildings here. So we want some sort of activated spaces during the day. And we did allow only live workspaces in the other 2 buildings. And now that we're going to have a 3rd one and wanting to create, both the applicant and we, a community here, I think we should think long and hard before we eliminate retail.
Buddy, and I understand all those points there. I guess what I'm still a bit confused, and I hear what you're saying, please, I do. But if we so decide, do we have the option to not have it? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying we want to, I'm not saying it's right, but do we?
Yeah.
It's an easy question. If we can't do it, then it's off the table. That's what I'm trying to understand.
This is Andy. Could I respond to that?
Yeah.
So the board does have some latitude under the ordinance to do that. To Don's specific technical question, but I would also agree with the comments that have been made thus far. We have worked with Minco for several projects already, and we have talked about the importance in the smart growth district of having a mix of uses as opposed to being just a complex of residences. So I understood obviously the concerns when One Boston Way happened, but I tend to agree that we have sort of a fiduciary duty, if you will, to encourage a mix of uses here. And of course, there could be endless debate over the particulars, but I do think it's important to try to keep that component in here. It wasn't necessarily that staff felt that was the exact location it should be in. I tended to agree with a comment that Bob had made earlier that it'd be preferable to have it sort of at the core of the building or closer to the train station, for instance, on the site. But on the whole, I would be pleased to have this activated use there next to the rail trail. I do think it can be a viable location. And I do think it adds something to the district and to the site that if you only approve residential units or only residential with live work units, that may or may not become sort of vibrant forward facing businesses. That may not be the true transit oriented development mixed use district that we had brought forward here.
No, thanks. Again, I don't disagree. I'm just trying to understand what is the exact legal or regulatory right. So thank you.
Let's go on to Heather. Your hand is still up and I don't know if it's from before or if it's a
No.
new comment.
Nope, I did the right thing. I took it down and put it back up. New
Okay.
comment.
Let's hear from you.
So I'm on the retail space too right now, and one of my thoughts, and I'm understanding now that this is something that we have to have in here, and I feel like it's a lot to put onto the residents to support this retail space, whatever it may be, in its near entirety. And I feel like that's what would happen if you move it closer to that inside circle. Whereas in fairness to whoever it is who's trying to operate a business, I feel like the greatest exposure would be to stay right where it is, actually on Route 1 for signage, visibility, just for ease of people finding them. And then perhaps tying it to the building better through some sort of an organic walkway that goes along the garage entrance behind and over, something that's more inviting. But I feel like to push it further into this neighborhood isn't as fair to whoever it is that's taking a chance on their business. I think that they should have more exposure and be out by Route 1 like that one is.
Thank you. Okay, Bob, you've been patient. Thank you.
Hard for me to be patient, so.
I'm helping you.
I know. The comments that were made about the types of business, I think we're right on the mark. And I think something like this requires some real creativity. And it becomes a kind of pavilion that can accommodate, a lot of different things seasonally. I think relative to Heather's comments, in terms of visibility from Route 1, I don't think there's enough of it to really become a destination along Route 1. And there's really not enough parking to support that. So it's not, a Dunkin' Donuts or a franchise of some sort where it has that visibility and that signage. I don't think that's what this is really. But it could be something that consistent with the earlier comments, could be something that really becomes an interesting component of this public space to the south of the building. And if this is about the district and about creating pedestrian activity, it's on the south side of the building. And I think you give up the visibility from Route 1, but you connect to the rail trail, you connect to the other residential projects, and I think maybe there's a way of making that work. I also think if you move it from the north, you might be able to somehow shift this whole residential block a little bit to the north and solve some of the proximity issues at the south end of the residential block where it starts to get a little close to Route 1. So I think there's a benefit there as well that might be worth looking at. I will say relative to the parking on the north side, I'm not sure I understand why that's there. If that's intended to satisfy part of the residential parking program, and I think you've got the numbers, maybe without that, we should talk about that also. It's so remote from the main entrances to the building. I would almost expect there to be a stronger entrance point at the north end of the residential block so that I could actually park there and walk immediately into the building and not have to walk down the sidewalk along Route 1 to get to the middle of the building to get in. I'm not sure why it's there to begin with. And if the retail moved to the south, I'd like to hear from the design team about what the real function of that is, if it's satisfying parking program or if you really see that as a benefit more broadly to the project.
Okay, let's move to parking and to circulation with that comment. And could someone on the applicant team please comment on that parking up there? If it's anything other than, well, it obviously is supporting the retail.
Lou, do you want to take that question? This is Joe
Sure.
Cirque.
Yeah, yes, I've raised, can you hear me? I raised my hand.
Go ahead, Lou.
Okay, thank you. We currently did a parking survey at 1 Boston Way, and we have 1.45 parking spaces per unit. So we've historically have found that you need 1.5 parking spaces to satisfy the requirements of the residents. But you also have a certain number of people who tend not to move their cars, that have a car, they might use it once a week. And so that we've been able to allocate parking spaces accordingly. So the people that use them every day tend to want parking spaces in the garage and convenient to the doors. People that have a second car who don't tend to use them as frequently, where as long as we can find them in a parking space where they can use on an occasion. This is not a lot of parking spaces to the north, but it will help us fulfill the parking requirements that the tenants look for. So we have tenants who will not rent spaces, will not rent the unit if they can't have 2 parking spaces, for example. And so we have to have enough to allocate at least 1 per unit, and then in some cases 2. So I envision that these parking spaces to the north will help us accommodate the requirements, but I also see them being assigned to people who don't use it on an everyday basis. In fact, if you were to go by 1 Boston Way, there's a white Mustang parked on one of our spaces on the street. I don't think the car has moved since it's registered and everything, but I don't think it's moved since they've moved into the apartment. So I envision some of those parking spaces to the far north being assigned to residents of that, like that. And then the 4 spaces and then some of the ones more adjacent to the community buildings would be kind of open to support the retail, as well as provide parking for the residents and guests.
This is Bobby. Can I just make a comment, Bonnie?
Sure.
Sorry. Lou may kick me under the table, but he's not next to me, so he can't do that. Just that kind of, as a Newburyport resident who uses that rail trail every day, because I commute, when I commute into Boston, I use that rail trail to get on the commuter rail. And just having seen the dynamics over time, I guess I would ask for you all not to cut the site too short relative to, this idea of a sidewalk along Route 1, I think is a Mass DOT. Well, it's a Mass DOT kind of requirement. It also provides the opportunity for future. If we kind of close the door to potential for people to walk along that edge, it limits future opportunities. In addition, I don't agree about the notion of commercial retail needing to be on the south side of this building. I view the whole experience of the rail trail, both this stretch and the stretch that runs all the way around the city, as kind of this string of pearls. And you've got Metsy's that's down at the train station. And, for a while, people kind of thought that was never going to live. That's stuck around for a long time. Just on the other side of this site, which we haven't really talked about, adjacent to the woodworking shop, is where Riverwalk has the beer garden that, that has evolved into having this kind of very vibrant activity in the beer garden right adjacent to the rail trail, which just happens to be like right across the street from where this kind of commercial retail space should be. And I think, in my experience, a lot of people come from, the downtown, the riverside of it. So I don't know that everything needs to be on the south side of the building. To me, it's like a series of experiences. There's different experiences that are civic on the south side on this Hill Street connector, as well as different experiences and opportunities on the north side. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there, because we've been thinking about not just one part being active, but about this idea of how do you activate multiple fronts along this whole stretch of this district.
The other thing about commercial space, even though we may not have it, we are significantly supporting it. So Bob brought up Metsy's. If you were to go to talk to Metsy's and ask him if he's seen a significant increase in his business as a result of 1 Boston Way, and he'll tell you definitely yes. And he's looking very much forward to the second building going up in this building as well. So we're supporting the local businesses in this general area. We don't really want to be competing against them. I suspect that, and I've spoken to some of our residents, that they go to the beer garden across the street. They go to Metzi's. Metzi's delivers. I mentioned the Rising Tide coffee shop on Pleasant Street, who comes with a food truck and every morning at 9:30 and serves coffee and pastry to our residents, and she has 10 to 12 people come down. So I think we are supporting businesses in this general area that historically haven't done all that well. That we all know that Metzi's building was vacant for over 10 years, if not longer, probably 20 years. And I think we've helped secure a little bit of his future.
Okay, are we ready to move off of the retail and look more at circulation and other areas of the site yet? Because I think there's some issues with, for example, the pedestrian connection. I'm a little confused because I see on this site plan, it goes through the rotary, and yet on one of the renderings, I saw it miss the rotary altogether. So where is that connection from the crossing at Hill Street all the way along the south end of the property, the site, and into the rail trail? Can one of the, Scott, can you answer that for
I can
us?
speak, yeah, I can speak to that. The simple answer to that is we're still in concept and we're very much wanting to get through. We were focusing on a lot of bigger picture items with this, and that inconsistency is just that. We haven't taken that final step yet as a design team to do the polishing that you're accustomed to seeing on a final plan. We have received comments back from staff, both John, Eric, and Caitlin, about that, and we're already working on this. Was my expectation is that it will be moved outside of the turnaround area. So if you kind of follow just the pure circle of that will be defined with inlaid flush curbing. It will probably follow that route, and we'll look at the parking a little bit, make sure we have a safe interface there.
Okay, good. Other comments from planning board members of issues we haven't dealt with yet? Bob.
Sure, I just would like to talk for a few minutes about parking in general.
Sure.
And the way that the parking is laid out and the way you get to numbers. I think there were some comments a few minutes ago that I think explained a few things, but the way I understand it, there are below grade, there are 83 parking spaces, I think. There are 23 parking spaces as you enter the project, and then there are, I think, about 20 spaces up to the north. And of the 83 parking spaces at the lower level, I think about 16 of those spaces are tandem parking spaces. So that may satisfy the 1.5 car per space kind of market average that you've seen on the adjacent projects, but they're not freely accessible spaces that potentially should count against the 106 or 107 spaces that are required on the site per the number of residential units. So we're kind of back to just understanding again how all of these pieces are intended to come together to satisfy the overall parking requirement. So I understand the 23 on the way in. I think the below grade parking, although it's improved from the last time around, still has some challenges in terms of circulation and access to spaces and maneuverability that, as the plan develops further, I think you could continue to look at. But I think we need to talk about whether this satisfies from an approval standpoint what the parking requirement really is.
So
16 of the total number of spaces are tandem spaces. So they're difficult to get at. If you want to pull up the parking level plan, we can take a look at that.
All right, Bob, which sheet were you looking for?
If you pull up the lower level plan
Yeah.
that
sure.
shows parking.
Yeah, page 20.
This is Scott. I can potentially speak to that, to Bob's question.
Yeah, so if you see, as you come to the bottom of the ramp, on the near side to the left and right, there are tandem parking spaces, which may satisfy particular users and cars that are second cars for families and not used all the time. But those are not spaces that are, freely accessible and, really should factor into the 106 or 107 parking spaces that are a requirement. So if you kind of take those out of the mix, you're still pretty close to the parking requirement on the site, but it's broken into pieces. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on how you get to the numbers that are the requirement versus numbers that the developers are seeing as a kind of market requirement for them.
Scott, you wanted to speak to that?
Yes, I can speak to that. So I mentioned in my presentation, we aggressively made an effort to minimize the parking to the absolute minimum that would satisfy both market and zoning. So here's some numbers for you. Just doing, Lou mentioned that at One Boston Way, they have a ratio of 1.45 parking spaces per unit. The current ratio with the tandem is 1.39 per unit. So we're just below what Lou would like to have for market needs, but we're close. As far as the requirement, based on the zoning, we're required to have 107 parking spaces. So if we take out the 16 from the 128, we have 112 spaces that are freely accessible from any open aisle anywhere on the property. So we satisfy zoning at the same time. The tandem parking spaces came up as we were brainstorming all sorts of ideas on this, on how to make it efficient. And speaking with Lou, he felt confident that exactly to your point, Bob, that families with 2 cars would lease 2 spaces and they would be assigned to those apartments, and that wouldn't be an issue. And speaking from personal experience as well, who lived with this situation with my wife for 5 years, it was never an issue. And frankly, it was efficient for us. And from a building footprint, if we can tandem spaces like this anytime, because we don't need extra pavement for aisles or extra building for aisles, we can build this right into the program. So I think we are checking all the boxes with respect to zoning and market demand, knowing that we are a little below what would be desirable from what the market is asking for.
And if I can just respond quickly, I agree. It's just I guess the only point I was making is that the spaces to the north end of the site then really are required to be part of that residential calculation to make this all work, if you're not counting the tandem spaces, but I think that's okay. The only other suggestion I would have is that, again, from a circulation standpoint, I think Arrow Street needs to keep looking at car turning radius and coming to the bottom of the ramp, and there are some spaces shown that are pretty tight to the edge of that ramp and entrance coming in, that you can maneuver into them, but it's a car maneuvering at the bottom of the ramp with potentially other cars coming in. And I would just think about that a little bit as the plans develop further. I understand these are very early diagrams, and I think the intent is there, and I think this is a big improvement over where you were the last time we looked at this, but just keep the circulation in mind. And I assume also these are all assigned spaces so that I don't have to find a way to turn around if I can't find a parking space down there. This is a one-way system, really, or a dead-end system, rather, that requires really that all of these spaces be assigned. Otherwise, you got to find a way to turn around at the end. So all of this can work, and it's not unusual for buildings like this, but I think just keep trying to fine tune as you go forward.
Okay, thanks. Don,
Yeah, just Bonnie, to build on your point with respect to parking and also circulation, I actually happen to have liked what was done with the parking. And one of my concerns was generally I don't like to have that much parking, or at least have it permeable. But because there's not even any really public streets right around there, if there was ever any overflow, it's tough. So I like the tandem. And then again, I do think, well, we'll call the North 40. I do see people parking there, and I think some of us in the planning board have witnessed this in streets. People park their cars there and they don't move for literally months. So what Lou had said that he's seeing in Boston Way, I think is very symptomatic of what we see in some of these congested areas, at least in the south end. Number two, with respect to the circulation, I do think we're going to get, and I appreciate the design team is still working on it. So I would just ask them, when they take a look at the rail trail connection from Route 1, the south part, I think you're going to find probably more people will take that if they're walking to the train station. And again, I'm mindful that I'm not sure the train volume will ever be what it was with work at home. That's a different issue. But where I'm coming from is if you would cross the Route 1 light there, the existing building there is a very nice sign that says no trespassing, do not use my parking lot, et cetera. So while at least most people do, I think there may be more of an inclination to people to take that connected to the rail trail and then head on south and hit the train station. So my point is you'll probably be finding people coming across there perhaps more during that time of the day. At the same time, the residents may be exiting the parking lot. So I would just say, when you take a look at that, just perhaps keep that in mind. And conversely, perhaps that scenario, what I just described, is not going to happen. But if you do agree that it would, then just take a look at some of the safety aspects of it. Thank you.
okay, moving on to, did someone want to respond from the?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Bonnie, it's Lou Minicucci. I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments of maybe of interest, nothing really to do with this approval process, but at 1 Boston Way, when I was negotiating with the MBTA, one of the things that they, not only did they want to sell it because they needed the cash to, when they sold the property for capital improvements, but they also were looking forward to increase in ridership. And I said, what do you anticipate? And they said, well, 10% of the units we expect as regular ridership. We just did a survey for our traffic engineer this week, and it's turned out that 21% of the people at 1 Boston Way used the rail. And I somewhat agree with Don. I'm not sure the train systems will ever be the same, but there is a lot of discussion about light electrified rail, and that's probably somewhere in the horizon, which I think will really rejuvenate the Newburyport line into Boston. But I thought it would be a point of interest to the board to know that 20% of our residents are relying upon, 21% actually, are relying upon the train.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Good, put some perspective on transportation. Rick, I believe, is next.
Thank you. Just to point out, the 40R zoning is a standalone zoning, so the regulations within that zoning are standalone. And unlike perhaps other parts of the city, the 40R zoning doesn't prohibit tandem parking. So these tandem spaces actually do count toward the, as far as I can see, toward the parking requirement. So I just want to make that point, because I don't think we should exclude them. I think they make a lot of sense as an efficient way to, as I think Lou said, provide for 2-car households where 1 car is hardly ever moved.
Right. Okay, good. Clarification. I also don't want to overlook these rather detailed comments from Jordy Vining about landscaping and circulation. We've hit on several of them already. I'm wondering if the development team would like to comment on any of these that we haven't dealt with yet, or that are appropriate at this time, because I don't want to push you into details that you're not ready to discuss until we are clear on the site plan. But if you'd like to comment on any of Jordy's comments, this would be the time to do it.
Bonnie, this is Bob Eulig.
Yes.
I don't have them in front of me, but I do recall he had some concerns about some of how we characterized the landscape that we were retaining on the north end, and some places we had clearing and grubbing, and other places we had protective language, and we can get that sorted out. I think, we've clearly recognized the importance, and after having walked the site, understand the value of the oak grove that's to the north there. I think we've also recognized in having discussions, and Scott Cameron, you can feel free to chime in on this too, that there may be some trimming of the trees that is necessary along that edge of Route 1 while retaining those trees in order to open up enough view corridors that, we can maintain safe visibility from the new parking lot to traffic that is coming southbound along Route 1. So we're going to be mindful of that. I think we've also, some of the language talked about clearing and grubbing to remove invasives. There is invasives in and amongst those tree groves. So I think some of the language probably just needs to be massaged so that it's kind of consistent with what Jordy's thinking and what our approach is relative to kind of not negatively adversely impacting the existing trees there while removing invasives in the areas that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah. So you're both going the same direction.
I think it's just a matter of syntax and language that we're talking about.
Yeah. There was one thing that came up in discussion with Jordy and Rick and Andy and myself on Monday, and that's related to the sidewalk. If we, on the Route 1 side, if we assume that one's going to stay there, and for the moment we will, because of the access it gives to the building on that side. We were looking at that sidewalk, in one of your renderings, it goes across the opening, the curb cut at the south end of the north parking lot. And then it just stops. It's one of those sidewalks to nowhere. We were wondering if you're not, and now I'm given the discussion tonight. Yes, thank you, Andy. Given the discussion tonight, I don't know if that's part of the requirement that you've understood from Mass DOT for a sidewalk over on this side of the building. But it seems to me, if anything, this sidewalk, if it's providing access to the building, that bit of sidewalk there is irrelevant, and you could replace it with more landscaping and just have it end at the at that one curb cut. Would that make sense?
Chair, I can reply to that. This is Scott. The short answer is yes, that actually was a requirement by Mass DOT to extend that up. They wanted it to the northerly curb cut and terminated there. So we turned it into the parking area. So at least, if somebody's parking there could come into it, and it wouldn't be bringing you into the actual curb cut where people are turning into the site. The anticipation is that this is future planning for Mass DOT to have a walkway along Route 1.
Okay.
This is Andy. Could I just ask, Scott, do you have another follow-up discussion with Mass DOT relative to this plan of the project?
I have not personally had that conversation. Scott Thornton, who is the traffic engineer, is dealing with those communications with MassDOT. So it's an ongoing communication right now with them. We've received some initial feedback, which we incorporated into the plans. As I mentioned, another comment was moving the sidewalk so it's entirely within the state layout. We really didn't like that idea, so we're pushing on that. So we're trying to negotiate what we hope is best for all, both the city, the applicant, and finding some compromise with Mass DOT.
Understood. I guess I would just ask, again, through the board, if either myself or Jordy or both of us could be pulled into that next looping back with them, just again, to see if there's anything else that could be done to tweak the plan in light of their feedback. We know that Mass DOT sometimes has a slightly different perspective on things, but just to walk through those particulars, because sometimes they can understand the community's concerns as being relevant to the project as well. So again, not any particular, but we'd like to be involved in that discussion here.
Okay, while we're still up here, I don't know which one to do first. All right, now that we're out here, I'll come back to the north parking lot. Along the other end of that sidewalk, how does it connect? Does it really connect into the crosswalk, and what's going on at that point? And if you guys need to talk more with Mass DOT to clarify that, it just looks messy. It doesn't look like it all links up very well. And I understand that there's some consideration for reconfiguring or somehow redesigning that crosswalk. Do you guys know anything about that? That's at Hill Street. Anyone on the applicant team?
There are definitely some challenges with that crosswalk. One, a lot of it, and in that area, a lot of it is not on this property. We don't control that. And it gets very narrow in that area as well. So we do have the comment. We're doing our best to take a look at that and see if there's anything we can do there to improve it. But it narrows. You can see how close the lot line is for the abutting property, which is 28 Parker, to that area. That's what we're up against.
Scott, I think the question was just if there was any ability. It looks like there's some space in the right of way, the Mass DOT right of way, to try to make a better connection there. I think was if I'm not mistaken, I think that was the concern.
The GIS isn't fully telling of the actual space available there. I would defer back to the site plan, which shows the property boundary in relation. The property line is actually closer where you can see in this aerial the fence. So
yeah, and I'm sorry. I think partly what the board might be getting at is that the plan set doesn't go far enough to address the connection with this intersection.
Yep.
So yeah.
I see Alden's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. There was one other point that Jordy raised in his comments, and that was about a deed restriction on the undeveloped northern part of the property by the north parking lot there. And I just wondered if there was any comments on that, any thoughts on that?
Deed restriction. This is Scott. I think I need a little more clarification on that question. I'm not aware of a deed restriction.
Yeah, I think he was implying that that he would like to see a deed restriction on the undeveloped part. I think part where that Oak Grove is, but I'd have to go back to his letter to see the exact language.
I'm sorry, Alden, are you talking about Jordy Vining's comments?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Again, I don't want to speak for Jordy directly, but my understanding of the concern there really is that try to for the rail trail have an undisturbed area. So the site plan itself would be sufficient, provided it protects as much as possible of that vegetation or the screening that's there.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't know if they were looking at that as a possibility.
Yeah, Andy, may I speak? This is Lou Manicucci.
Sure.
The deed restrictions tend to complicate my financing when we try to get these projects financed. My thought is that if we have an approved site plan and we must build it in accordance with the approved site plan, I'm not sure why a deed restriction, what purpose that would serve. So I would just like to comment, unless it's entirely necessary, it just complicates my title. I mean, these projects, when all three of these projects are built out, this is going to be close to $100 million investment. I have to go to banks and institutions to try to get them financed. The cleaner my titles, the better off that I am in the long run. And sometimes these little small superfluous restrictions in the title just complicate the financing process.
Okay, that makes it really clear, Lou, and you're right. If it's a good, as it's going to be, a good detailed site plan, that will show where there is protected, undisturbed land.
Right.
Yeah, on the property. So that should take care of it. While we're here, the curb getting into this north parking area, I've discussed with other people, the idea that maybe it's a little tight for entry if you're coming off of Route 1. Yeah, traffic doesn't whiz through there, but it appears very fast. So if you're coming off and there's any kind of a backup, you need plenty of space to maneuver in the parking lot. I'm wondering if you guys want to consider taking out the first 2, maybe even 4 parking spaces. Yeah, right there. For safety purposes. It just might work a little better.
Yeah, and this is Andy. This several of the staff, I think, as you know, with the comments we received, several of the staff here have a similar concern.
So please put that into your hopper of considerations.
Okay, I guess I'll just be repeating myself, but I actually envision that those spaces would not be turned over frequently. So
That's the problem. Yeah, I'm sorry, Lou, that is the problem. Having cars right there and maneuvering, coming in maybe with a rather short notice to get in there so that someone's trying to get off of Route 1, they need space to move around in there. And so if that were just open, it would just, and if there were more than one car coming in at the same time, it just gives them the space to maneuver in there.
okay.
Chair, this is Scott. Yeah, I have your comment. I will take it under advisement and go back with Scott Thornton and also working with Mass DOT who would be looking at that as well. So we'll take a look at that and come back to you with our professional opinion on those spaces.
Okay, great.
Chair, could I also raise another question relative to parking?
Yeah.
Just looking at the site plan, just again, the technical question, recognizing the discussion the board's had with the applicant about the number of spaces and safety concerns, layout and so forth. Again, these are tweaks, I think, to the plan that folks are working with right now. But I'm just wondering from the designer's side, maybe the architect side or the civil engineer side, is there any ability to, if there's a need for additional parking spaces to offset things that might be adjusted on the site, is there the ability to extend, underground that garage at either end in the site to accommodate a few more spaces? Recognizing, like Bob said, the concern about maybe some spaces underground. I don't myself have the issue. I'm more aligned with what I think Rick said on those, the tandem spaces. But if there is a concern about that, is there an ability to extend the building underground a little further to get those spaces?
I'll let Joe speak to the building. That end of the building, I will know we didn't hit on it tonight, but we did add a rain garden into that area in support of the sustainability, low impact design input.
This is Joe Sirkovich. So we could look at extending the basement level for parking. We could only probably do it on one side, so it'd be very expensive because we're at a pinch point on both sides of the site with that triangle. So we could only extend the drive lane and maybe one side of the parking.
Okay. trying to see what outstanding issues there might be. We are assuming, and I think you mentioned, one of you mentioned this in passing, that you are in touch with Phil Christensen and DPS through John Eric. So we're going to leave those details to assume that you guys are going to work that out. And if there are any issues, you'll bring them to the planning board. Is that appropriate for you, for the team?
Works for us. Yep.
All right. And of course, well, what I'd like to do actually is, I think there's one outstanding issue right now. I'd like to get a straw vote from the planning board members on where the retail should be located, because I want that to be clear for the applicant so they don't start messing around with it and aren't going the direction we want them to go in. So let me just see, you can physically put your hand up. Those who would like to see the retail moved more to the center of the site. So, okay, there's
Center
two.
being south.
Yeah, south, more south. And those who would prefer to leave it where it is and work out the details that have been discussed so far. Okay. All right, so I think we're going to leave it where it is. That's clear. The other thing is, I don't think we need to take a straw vote to tell you guys that the team that we certainly like this site plan a lot better than the previous one, and that you're definitely heading in the right direction. So that should give you some confidence to work out another level of detail. What more from anybody? Let's see, first of all, I see a hand up for Don. So let's see what he's got on his mind. No, you'll have to unmute before we can hear you.
I lowered it.
Oh, you lowered it. All right, great. Okay, so back to what I was going to say. Anything that, certainly on the staff report, for those of us who have it in front of us, that is outstanding, that should be discussed at this point, to give the design team all the information they need to move forward. And I include Andy in that, and any board members who want to highlight anything at this point that we may have left out. And don't worry about it being too detailed. If they think it's too detailed at this point, they'll tell us. So whatever's on your mind right now, I'd like them to know about it. Okay, we're going to send them off to do more work. That's the consensus. Or we're so exhausted with this, we need to move on. But I think this has been a really good discussion. My question to the design team is it realistic, given our joint interest in moving along efficiently, to have you come back on January 5th, which is after the next 2 weeks of holidays? Is that much work going to get done on your part, as well as the reviews that have to happen by Christensen and John Eric and others? Realistic to see that we would have much progress made by January 5th, or would you prefer to come to our second meeting in January, which is whatever date it is?
19th.
Yeah, this is Scott. I guess, Andy, do you want to go first? Or?
Oh, no, that's quite all right. Yeah, my thinking was just based on the relevant factors here was probably the 19th is more realistic to the point that maybe the chair was getting at. But like the chair said, we have the 5th of January and then the 19th after that.
I mean, if you think, yeah, let me just say that if you think you could get some things done that you want us to look at on the 5th for a sort of check-in, that's doable. But I don't want to drag you all back here unless it's going to help you.
Yeah, this is Scott. So I think I'm in that position where I'm steering the bus on this because we're onto the technical piece. We have actually continued to advance all the technical design and peer review response work forward. Even over the past week since he received these plans, I did speak with Phil Christensen earlier today. He did not express any concerns about getting a response straight back to me. We actually went through several of the comments by phone today, and I feel we're on the same page. So I do fully expect you make a submittal on the technical basis this Friday morning, allowing time over the break, and hopefully be prepared on the 5th to have another conversation with some of the comments we heard tonight. The coordination, a lot of it is just like plan reconciliation coordination, like the crosswalk area. We just got some cleanup to do. So I think our team definitely feels the 5th is the date.
Okay, we'll be here and we'll be happy to talk with you.
Bonnie,
Yes, Rick.
just want to clarify. So there's a new utility plan that's required as part of this, correct? And
Yes.
there's a lot of reconciliation between the site plans and the landscaping plans and the architectural plans. So I guess that's the question I would have. For example, the site plan doesn't show the two side entrances or exits onto the Newburyport Turnpike where the architectural plan does. So there's some pretty significant differences. And I just want to be sure that, that the plans that you have on the day after tomorrow, if that's what you're saying, are going to be resolving all of those things rather than have us spend a lot of time next meeting and then spend a lot of time the 2 meetings after that. So it's really important that everything to the maximum extent possible does get resolved in this next go round, I think.
Scott, is that realistic?
Yeah, our next hurdle in the critical path, I guess, is the technical review, and that's where our focus. So my expectation is on Friday, you're going to get the technical package with the utility plans and the drainage and the construction details, that detail. The reconciliation piece, I think the sidewalks already coordinated. I can't speak for the other team members, but I think we're very close. And even if that came in, the week before, over the holiday week or some other point before, I think we're ready. But at a minimum, I'd want to be prepared to talk about the technical pieces and some of the questions, for example, the entrance on the northerly end of Route 1, things like that with the board, so you know where we're at. And I think that would be a good use of our time as a polishing coming into the meeting on the 19th, where hopefully we can, or I hope maybe we could be coming to the finish line there.
So that's where you would see all the reconciliation and the plans all matching up.
I think on the 19th is yes. Yep. So one more polishing, more on a technical basis for the meeting on the 5th is what I would envision. Bob or Joe, I guess, speak up.
I think that sounds correct from Bob's perspective, that the 19th would make more sense to have all the i's dotted and t's crossed.
Right.
I agree with that too. Joe Cirkovich here.
Okay. Well, I hope you guys have time to have some holiday vacation or visits or whatever. But we really appreciate your pushing this, and we don't want to get in your way. So we will I'll take a motion to continue to January 5th. Planning board members, wake up. I need a motion.
So moved. Rick,
Thank you, Rick. Second,
I'll second, Alden.
You got Lou.
Alden. Okay, and I will call roll. Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. So we'll see you on January 5th. This is a really good, productive meeting, and I look forward to the next one being equally productive. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you for all your input.
Yes, and from the developers end, we want to thank you and for your time and effort, and appreciate it especially over the holiday season, and wishing everybody a happy holiday and happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to all of you as well. See you then.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, planning board members, we are going to move on to approval not required for 47 Marlborough Street. And I'm wondering if Ed Dixon is, yes, he is. Good. All right.
Hello.
Board.
I'm here.
Yeah. Whoops, we're getting some feedback. I don't know if you have two devices on, or can you sort that out on your end?
Let me see what I can do.
And if it's just the one speaker in the room, if you can shut the one speaker set off, that will help the echo effect. I did while he's trying to work that out, pull up a plan for the board. And I'm happy to speak to it if the board wants. I don't know. Ed, are you with us?
Yeah, I have.
It would appear that you're running two devices in the same room, and if you could shut one of them off, or the speakers at least, that would prevent the echo effect that we're getting.
Yeah, okay. The only problem is I may have a hard time hearing you. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, and we can hear you, but you can just shut off the speakers.
On the computer, even though it's not working, shut the computer speakers off.
Okay, hold on.
His technical advisor is working with him.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yes, lovely.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed.
Is that better? Oh,
We just lost you. I think it might be easier if Andy did it, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah,
I can hear
and if it's all right with you, I can give just an overview of the plan. It's a pretty straightforward, I think, as an A&R, if that's all right.
I think that's very straightforward.
Okay. Yeah, so, and if I could, just for the applicant, knowing you have another A&R after this as well, this is simply a lot split. There, as you can see, the typical thing you see with these A&R plans, the required frontage and the required square that has to fit in the lots is shown as a light line type. But as you can see, they're carving off a separate lot. And then there's sort of a jog in the back here area to adjust for rear yard areas and some existing features. But it seems pretty straightforward. The office recommends endorsement as is typical for these approval not required plans.
Any questions from anybody? Okay, I'll take a motion to endorse.
So moved.
Thank you, Don. Second?
I'll second, Alden.
Okay, and I have to take roll. Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. So that plan is endorsed. Thank you. Sorry, Ed.
Thank you.
We got you twice. Right. And Andy, you were going to present the next one for Story Avenue and Lieutenant Larry Drive.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. So yeah, that sort of presenting this one really because it's coming from the city. So probably familiar with the plan and the project. So some of you know the Cutter or West End Fire Station is planned to be reconstructed or redone as an entirely new facility. So in order to accommodate that, some of you might have been following the project details, know that additional area was needed for that. So you see the existing building, an additional area here. In order to acquire that piece, it's being broken off from an existing long residential lot. And this lot will be remaining. Technically, this lot that's remaining is actually undersized, but the zoning ordinance was amended recently to address something that we did not have, which was how we address situations like that in the case of an eminent domain taking. So that language is now in the ordinance, addresses that. But, otherwise, this is your typical A&R plan. And we are breaking off one piece from this lot and adding it to the city's parcel here, so that that project has the area it needs.
Okay, any questions? Then let's have a motion to endorse.
So moved, Rick.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second it.
Thanks, Heather. Roll call, Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes, so that's endorsed as well. We only have one of these sets of minutes for 10/20/21. I know I've looked over them. I don't know if anyone else has. I didn't see anything substantive. So we'll take a motion and then see if there's any discussion. I have a motion to approve.
I'll make it. I'll
Thank
make
you.
it.
Second,
I'll second, Alden.
any discussion? All right, I'll take.
I had a
roll.
question actually on, what was it? It's toward the end, I think, one of the votes. Oh, it was actually approval of minutes. So it was on the minutes of October 6th. I thought we started the meeting with 8 members and then Beth left. So I thought we should have 7 members. It only said there's 6 members voted. So I'm not really sure. That just may be a mistake in terms of there should be 7 members rather than 6, I think.
Okay, great.
And then there's a point in on the previous page. It just says Beth had to leave ? That should probably just be,
I filled that in, I think, when
Okay.
I sent my notes to,
okay.
to Linda, so that's taken care of.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll take a vote for approval of minutes as amended. Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. Okay. Other updates from the chair or the planning director, the only thing I know about is short-term rental units, the 2 amendments, both the zoning and the licensing, were carried over by the city council until the new session. But they have been reconciled. They are quite a bit updated, and I think the idea is that they will be, and Andy can correct me if I got this wrong, I think they will be re-publicized for a final joint public hearing and city council adoption in the new session. And Andy had said that he would send those 2 newest final drafts to the planning board. I haven't seen them yet unless they came in late. But we should be seeing both the licensing and the zoning ordinance. Have I got that
Yes.
right?
You do. Yes, thank you, Chair. So I will be, and I apologize I wasn't able to get to it today. So I will be sending out to you a copy of the original version, the amended version of the zoning, which requires a license from the Licensing Commission, which is a separate ordinance. But just due to some substantive changes, including the requirement of a special permit, we have to re-advertise the hearing before it's adopted. So the council carried that item over as they are able to do at the end of their session into the new year. And they'll take that up at that point, the first meeting, in January. I presume that will be forwarded to the Planning and Development Committee that they have for a joint public hearing, as is typical. There are a few, things being discussed in relation to that ordinance, but quite a bit of work has been done in the last, 6 or so months, if you will, on changes to that. So if you're interested, take a look at the language and the details. The ZBA would be the special permit granting authority, not the planning board, but obviously you would be advising the council on any zoning change again for this particular subject matter come, say, January, February timeframe.
You said there are things being discussed still. Are there?
Well, there are a
points
couple of
in
minor
the drafts
language.
that are still being discussed?
There were a couple of minor language things that we need to work out with the authors of the ordinance, more just to make sure that the language is clear. There isn't any ambiguity and so forth. There are some other things that need to be taken into account. So one of the things that from the office's perspective, we had raised with the council was just recognizing that we do need to make sure we have the adequate staffing, and the boards, in this case, the zoning board of appeals, may need to consider additional time to handle the number of hearings that they might have. So it depends a little bit on what sort of an influx of applications might come in. There are a good number of short-term rental units in the city. Not all of them would comply with this ordinance, of course, but there would be an influx of applications and inquiries and so forth from folks. And we just want to make sure that the boards are prepared for whether they need additional hearing nights for that sort of thing, and that the staff can adequately keep up with both the initial administration and working with folks to determine which ones are compliant, which ones aren't. And then the sort of enforcement things that might come with that, because there are some folks who are operating who may not be able to on a go-forward basis, and some time will need to be spent on that aspect as well. So we just wanted to make sure that the resources are there to implement and enforce as we add to the zoning ordinance, we add new provisions and requirements. We need to make sure that there's adequate staffing and that the boards can do that. Right now, they typically max out on the number of hearings per night, the zoning board of appeals. So we had talked to the chair and vice chair about the possibility of additional meetings if that's needed to handle the influx, and we just want to make sure that's taken into account. Short of that, I've talked with the sponsor, one of the sponsors, about the different vendors or platforms online that help to monitor what folks are advertising for short-term rental units, and that helps us to monitor and basically make sure that folks are in compliance. But again, that's an automated system, so we still need someone who is boots on the ground here that can deal with the enforcement side. They can automate some of the tracking and the reporting and documentation of things that are in compliance or not. But as far as actually implementing and being there when someone calls in about a parking concern or a nuisance concern in the neighborhood and so forth, we do still need to have, whether it be the police department going out or the zoning administrator, and the staffing to handle the paperwork, and like I said, the board members, the applications that might be coming in.
Is there still discussion about a third party being involved in the monitoring and enforcement?
Yeah, there is, and I do think that would be necessary in this context because of the way that the short-term rent units are advertised and the amount of time it would take. It'll be really time or cost prohibitive for us to sort of monitor that on our own. So the use of the online platform and the algorithms they run to sort of give us reporting and essentially document things that have been advertised and so forth. So it helps us to keep an eye on what's happening out there. But then again, that would be used essentially as a documentation and reference for the zoning compliance, essentially, and the license compliance, to make sure that folks are adhering to that. And we'd have to basically cross-reference what we're seeing there through the vendor and online with what we have for permits and what the ordinance says.
Andy, that's a lot of work to do. And I am just wondering, to set it up, I am wondering if you have the possibility of moving forward on any of that before the ordinances, both ordinances are adopted, because I'm worried
yeah.
about time frame, and they're talking about enforcement coming into play June 1st. That means all of this is up and running, and there are applications approved, and people are in short-term rental units before, legal ones, before June 1st. And I don't know how that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, the software side of it could be done, right? But I think that the bandwidth, or what might be coming in a very short amount of time, what I think was part of my concern was the board itself, even aside from anything the staff needs to do to administer it all, that the board members themselves might be, in the position of having to have a meeting every week or whatnot to handle these things coming in, even if they're somewhat similar. Remember, with a special permit process, it's a little bit more involved in the license. You have all the abutters that might be interested in coming to the hearing and weighing in. So that could be quite a bit of time being spent by the board itself, the volunteer members, to do the administration. So that was one of the reasons why, when we first talked about these ordinances, almost 2 years ago at this point, really, we had talked about the license as being the primary control in the way of dealing with nuisances and not lack of compliance. So there's been some adjustment in the way that's being done, but I think we can have a further discussion about that. And again, making sure that if it is going to be implemented, X date in 2022, that we can actually handle that influx of applications and, to the chair's point, handle the enforcement on the effective date or the enforcement date that's called out in the ordinance.
Okay, this is good background for everybody to just be thinking about what you want to raise as any kind of issues separate from what's written in the documentation when we have the joint public hearing. There may be good advice, let's put it that way, for the council in considering how this gets rolled out. They usually just approve something and then it's off to somebody else. In this case, I think it would be irresponsible if we didn't have that conversation during the joint public hearing. So give it some thought and see what advice, concrete advice, we might be able to give to them to help make this happen as smoothly as possible. Let me just say it that way. Okay, are there any other updates or questions from the board members you'd want to ask Andy?
If there aren't any questions, I would just note again, I think I mentioned at a prior meeting, but with the new mayor-elect coming in and New England Development, obviously interested in discussing Waterfront West. We've heard about, their potential interest in working with Avalon. I would expect, on one side or the other or both, some discussion again of Waterfront West, come next year. So, again, some of you have already been involved with those discussions over the years, but think about what you think makes sense there. Maybe you might want to look into some of the old documents if you have interest in looking at some of the old, analysis that was done in the last couple of attempts to rezone Waterfront West. We can, post some things and provide additional information for those of you who aren't familiar with it. But there was some discussion several years back on a couple of instances about Waterfront West rezoning. There was debate about, to me, the fundamental issue we continue to come back to as a community is what is the right density, what is the right height, size and massing of structures there. And I think that it seems preferable to me, given the process that folks have gone through on Waterfront West before here, that we try to work out that issue a little bit more upfront this time around, irrespective of where an actual sponsored ordinance may come from, just so that we're not all in the public forum and working in the weeds on language changes and other things like that. If there is not actually yet a reasonable consensus on size, scale, or massing, it was quite obvious that the community was not comfortable with the amount of density or the size of what was being proposed by New England Development last time around. And they have, with the Avalon concept, proposed something similarly scaled or in terms of height and massing. So given that may not be consistent with what the community thinks is compatible with the historic downtown, it's right there. It seems like that may be a good starting point for us, is to work from there and work backwards into the other parameters of the project, rather than focusing on a bunch of other ones and not being able to reach consensus here on that. Whether or not New England Development is on the same page as the community about what that massing is obviously understandable. There might be some debate there, but for us as a community, I think there was some discussion about whether or not we had access to NED's model last time, whether or not we make our own to work out some of these issues. But again, just think about Waterfront West, what you think makes sense there. And certainly the board members here who have been here for a while can, in addition to myself, let you know what's been discussed previously and what some of our waterfront strategic plans and other things say about the importance of mixed use and scale and size and so forth.
Andy, I know the Waterfront West page from a couple of years ago still exists, but there doesn't seem to be an easily accessible link to it on the page. I wonder if you could just put the link back up on the project updates, because I had to search for it to give it to somebody else fairly recently, and you can find it by doing a search, but you really have to find the right planning board meeting or the right whatever it is.
You are right on target. Yeah, sorry. No, we had it as underneath our project updates at one point. It might have slipped from there. So I will definitely work with Diane tomorrow to get that obvious link back up there from the planning department page. And then, we can go from there to see if there's anything else that you're looking for. We can add it to the page.
There's a lot of good information on that page.
Andy, to your point, I feel like a broken record, but since you brought it up, I'm gonna reiterate what at least Rick and I have been pushing for, which is to revise the overlay district. And in order to do that, we need to have some type of modeling of what the massing and scale and so on of the proposals that we've looked at so far, ours and theirs, and even the old version of the overlay district, to compare and contrast. My understanding is that we need $60,000 to do that. It may be a number that's totally wrong right now, but I've received pushback from you and others that we really can't have a reasonable discussion of a revision to that overlay district until we can get some modeling done of the information we've gathered over the years. So unless that's forthcoming, I don't see how we can make any progress with an overlay district. And all of that is to say, another question. So Avalon and New England Development are looking at a 40B. Are we just going to ignore that and go on with putting out what we would like to see there in terms of an overlay district?
I'm sorry, did you want me to speak to that, or were you hoping for?
Yeah, I'm really confused. I'm
Okay.
so confused.
Yeah, so
I'd love to go ahead and ignore that whole, business, because I don't know anything
Yeah.
about it anyway, so it makes it real easy. But why would we even try to make an argument to city council to fund some modeling to help us revise the overlay district to prepare for the next application from them if they're going to come forward with a 40B?
Yeah, no, those are all great questions, and then crossing points. It seems to me, I'm not as concerned about, at least initially, or at least, in the near term, concerned about a threat of an unwanted 40B or an undesirable 40B type project. I do think with the Haley's 40R project before you, there is the ability for the city to, in approving that project, to take what we call a safe harbor from 40Bs. Applications, the board would put the zoning board of appeals in a position to reject a project that is when we were making progress towards our affordable housing units, so on the so-called subsidized housing inventory. So Minko's projects have actually been the more substantial increase in the city's affordable housing in recent years, and we get credit for the projects at the Haley site as well when those come online, in this case permitting from the planning board. That carries over when you get to building permits and occupancy permits to take credit for that. But we could basically have a so-called safe harbor for a couple of years as a result of that project that you have on your docket right now, should that be approved in the near term. So I guess I'm less concerned about the so-called threat of a 40B in a maybe not as appropriate location or context or composition. Although that is something we need to take a look at. We have been preparing our zoning board of appeals for what it would, what a hearing process like that would look like, and so forth. But I do think it benefits the city, even aside from New England Development, to look at the zoning for Waterfront West, since it's not something that has successfully come to completion as a redevelopment or project, irrespective of New England Development. Just for the city, from the city's perspective, it hasn't happened yet, and some of that obviously is within the property owners' control. But from our end, for instance, I'm talking to the grant administrator tomorrow about a potential grant from the state we're interested in applying for. And that grant may be the way that we are as a community, aside from asking the council for funds, one way for us to pay for not only assistance with some of the zoning pieces, the more technical aspects, that we might want to roll in, to actually have modeling done on our end, so that we can work with our own consultant on these types of things, whether that's picking up the plan that was last looked at or some other variation of it, but to maybe address at least the massing, scale, and size issue to some degree. There's lots of ways of getting from point A to point B, but certainly, would be beneficial, from the city side to see some progress on Waterfront West. But that's not to say that it's the exact same plan that New England Development wants. But I do think there's some benefit on both sides if it is in fact productive, of course. And I do think that has a large part to do with whether or not the property owner recognizes what the right scale and compatibility is, and whether or not we can get there together.
Well, I just want to go on the record as saying the planning board could take the reins on this one and start the discussion of an overlay district, bring the council in for that discussion, and show New England Development that we are serious about seeing something there, but we want to see what fits for us, and that they are not going to drive this next round.
And they have reached out to the mayor-elect. No meeting's been scheduled yet, of course, since the last one, the Mayor Donna Holland and I had with them in Boston some weeks back. But I suspect they'll be interested in obviously, talking with the mayor-elect coming in the door and getting a sense of where he stands on Waterfront West. And obviously with the new composition of the council, that's a factor too. So, and anything that they might have on their legislative agenda for the upcoming session. So a lot of moving pieces there, but I definitely would expect, all things being equal, some focus on Waterfront West and trying to see if we can get a little further along than we were able to do last time. And again, that's not to say that any fault was done on our side, of course, but just to see whether or not anything more could be done there.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? Well, thank you for hanging in there. That was really a lot of work to do. Wishing you all very happy holidays, and I'm going to be back in the same place first of the year. So it looks like we're on Zoom for the foreseeable future. I'm not even going to go there with masking and increased infections. I think this is the safest route to go, and it makes it easier. So if you're thinking we were going to meet in person, it's not going to be for a meeting anyway. All right. Could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Who did I hear first? Fight it out. Tell me who I got.
Heather.
Oh, great, me. So moved.
And the second.
I guess it made Don.
All right. Final roll call of the year. Alden,
Yes.
Bob,
Yes.
Heather,
Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Bonnie, yes. Good night.
Good
Happy New
night.
Year.
All right.
Later, everyone.
Happy holidays.
Yes, happy holidays.